What's up everyone, the Game2K2 here once again, and today I begin my review of the one and only Star Wars film franchise. I've been wondering for a while whether I should do this review in numerical order or release order, so I've decided that I'm going to do this review in release order. So today I'm going to start this review with Star Wars Episode 4 through 6. So let's not waste any more time, let's begin with Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. The movie begins in the middle of a galactic war between a rebellion and an evil empire. Princess Leia, who is part of a rebellion, is captured, and after lying about the location of the rebel base to the Empire's General Tarkin and Darth Vader, she is set to be killed. But before she was captured, she sent out a message to an old Jedi warrior named Obi-Wan Kenobi. Kenobi eventually gets the message by a young man named Luke Skywalker, and Obi-Wan Kenobi decides to train Luke to become a Jedi himself. They manage to get a ride to Princess Leia's home planet by a man named Han Solo and his friend Chewbacca, but they are found by the Empire and are taken to their base known as the Death Star, and this leads to Luke, Han, and Chewbacca saving the princess, and Obi-Wan and Darth Vader getting into a lightsaber battle. There's so much more to this story, but that's the main premise. George Lucas took a huge risk starting this series off from the middle of the story, and not from the beginning, but it actually turned out really well. For some reason, even without the prequel series, it feels like we already know these characters despite this being the first movie that we've seen them in, and that's really unique. It's unique because despite what so many people might think, there really isn't that much character development in the original version of the movie. For instance, Chewbacca has no backstory, C-3PO and R2-D2 have no backstory, Darth Vader and Obi-Wan's backstory are kept to a minimum, and so is Han Solo's story. But for some reason, despite little details about the characters, we feel like we know them more. Only one element of the movie really tends to get on my nerves, and that's the dialogue, which is beyond repair in some places. George Lucas' intentions was to pretty much turn the galaxy into a huge government, and so many of the characters talk like they're actually part of a government. Nothing wrong with it, but when most of it is dialogue that only a politician would understand, then there's seriously a problem. The movie also suffers a little bit by the fact that it starts the story off in the middle of the story and not the beginning. I know that might sound hard to believe, especially with the prequel series out, but if you were someone sitting in theaters in 1977 watching this for the first time, then some of it would have left you a little confused. But this winds up being a small flaw because the story overall still remains largely intact. Besides that, the movie is brilliantly done. The cinematography is great. If I had to say anything about George Lucas, it's that he really knows how to shoot a beautiful looking movie. Star Wars just has one of those looks. It's one of those movies where just the way it looks will keep you engrossed. The set designs and the beautiful locations they choose to shoot in are just really well thought out. And considering how low this budget was compared to the rest of the series, just makes the spaceship sets even more impressive because they built a lot on the budget that they had. Then there are the effects, which were state-of-the-art at the time. A lot of people might consider these pretty cruddy effects today, but at the time they were unbelievable. The lightsaber battles, the spaceship battles, the blaster effects were all things that weren't done at the time, and what might look simple today took months and months to design back in the 1970s. Then of course we have the cast and the acting. Because of the dialogue and because of the reputation that most sci-fi films got at the time, it seemed natural that the acting would be terrible. But this is honestly a very well performed film, and there is not a casting choice out of place in Star Wars. I love every bit of the casting. I love Mark Hamill as Luke, Harrison Ford as Han Solo, Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, and of course Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan. And you also can't leave out Peter Cushing as Governor Tarkin and the dual efforts of David Prowse and James Earl Jones as Darth Vader. I think the one thing that separated this cast from others was their chemistry. Even after all these years and all the movies that I've watched, I can honestly say that this cast had the best chemistry in film history, and I don't think it will ever be matched. Another element that really makes the movie is John Williams' classic score. John Williams is a composer that just doesn't miss when it comes to scoring a movie, and Star Wars is no exception. So overall, Star Wars is quite honestly one of the best movies ever made. There is no other way to describe it. But I'm not quite done with this movie yet. I feel like I have to bring up the constant re-releases of the movie. The recent edition of the movie has more CGI and even brought back a deleted scene with Han Solo and Jabba the Hutt. While 5 and 6 have special editions too, 4 was the movie that got the biggest makeover, and I both like and really hate it too. While some of the effects are really entertaining, some just seems out of place and senseless. Alright, let's move on to The Empire Strikes Back. The Empire Strikes Back was greenlighted due to the incredible success of the first movie, but production definitely wasn't easy. Production was way behind schedule, and the film's budget just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which was causing a lot of worry. The story continues from 4. The rebellion is still at war with the Empire, and we get to see their battle progress. Luke is then visited by what appears to be the spirit of Obi-Wan, and he tells him to visit an old Jedi named Yoda, who will continue his training. He goes to Yoda, who has been in hiding on a distant planet, but Luke's training goes incredibly wrong when he senses that his friends Leia and Han are in danger. They are indeed in danger, as Darth Vader has lured them into a trap and freezes Han so he can be taken by a bounty hunter to Jabba the Hutt. Luke goes to save them despite warnings from Yoda as well as Obi-Wan, but it leads to a battle with him and Darth Vader where he finds out a terrible truth. George Lucas stepped out of the director's chair for this movie and let another director take the movie on, and that director was Irvin Kershner. Kershner, while keeping much of George Lucas's style present, added a lot of his own style as well, which does make Empire Strikes Back appear to be a little bit different than A New Hope. The reason why it appears different is because Kershner provides a little more free range with his directing. George Lucas has earned a reputation for not allowing a lot of improvisation from the actors, which is quite obvious when you watch the first movie. Not necessarily with the acting, but definitely with the dialogue. Kershner was also very good on the dramatic elements of the story, letting scenes build and really have a good payoff. A good example of this is Luke's Jedi training, which leads into Luke envisioning himself killing Darth Vader and then seeing himself in Vader's helmet. With that being said, I do love the development of Luke's character, showing that he is no longer the young kid from the first movie and that he's growing more mature. The action is also better in this movie. The battles are more intense, and the area that sees the most improvement is the lightsaber battle. That's an area of the first movie that I haven't really talked about yet. The battle between Obi-Wan and Vader was a pretty slow fight, which had to do a lot with Alec Guinness's age, and also the fact that it was the first time that they had ever done that effect. Empire Strikes Back takes it further. It's a little more faster and a little more violent. Then of course there's the acting, which is just as good, if not better, than A New Hope. Like I said before, Kershner allows a lot of free range with the actors, and it shows because despite the great acting of A New Hope, every cast member really gives their best performances for this movie, with the most impressive in my opinion being Mark Hamill. Another impressive performance is from Frank Oz, who provides the voice and the puppeteer work for Yoda. This was an idea that could have completely backfired, but Frank Oz really makes it work and makes the character very believable. So overall, Empire Strikes Back is everything A New Hope was and more. It is quite literally almost the perfect movie, and I don't think a single person can hate this film. Obviously, since The Empire Strikes Back was very successful, Lucas was given the green light to do the third film, which will be titled Return of the Jedi. Obviously, since it was announced that this would be the end of the story, a lot of hype surrounded this movie, and living up to The Empire Strikes Back was definitely going to be an uphill challenge. But let's find out whether or not they actually managed to do so. The story picks up pretty much where the last movie left off. We see C-3PO, R2-D2, Leia, Luke, Chewbacca, and Lando Calrissian, who was introduced in The Empire Strikes Back, try and save Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt. After a few problems, they manage to kill Jabba and save Han. Luke then visits Yoda, where Yoda sadly passes away, but not before telling Luke that he must face his father, Darth Vader, one more time. Luke then finds out from Obi-Wan that Leia is actually his sister. We then see the rebellion plan an attack on the now unfinished second Death Star. They go to a nearby planet to shut down the Death Star's shields, but run into trouble and eventually run into a population of creatures known as Ewoks. Luke leaves the mission and gets captured by Darth Vader and is taken to the Emperor, and Luke tries to turn his father away from the dark side. While still very good, Return of the Jedi is much more flawed than the previous two movies. The first thing that's rather noticeable is the change of pace. This movie's story is far more straightforward than the ones before. With A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, there seemed to be a more methodical pace to both the story and the battles, while Return of the Jedi is much faster. I think the thing that really hurt the movie was that it was very cluttered with comedy. Whether intentional by Lucas or not, some of the new characters come off more funny than intimidating. For instance, Jabba the Hutt, who had been described as this horrible and serious character in the first two movies, is rather funny to watch when he's finally introduced. The puppeteer work is awesome, but it's really hard to take the character seriously. Then there's the Ewoks. George Lucas has tried his damnedest to defend this issue, but there's just no defending it. This is easily one of the worst ideas ever. They didn't even intend for these characters to look the least bit real. They look like they're walking teddy bears and they act like kids. And I know they're meant to be the good guys, but I'm pretty sure I'm not alone on this, but I wanted the stormtroopers just to kill all of them. Okay, now besides that, the movie does have a good amount of things that are done right. For one, I do like a couple of the plot twists, like Leia being Luke's sister. It was a great reveal because it just came straight out of nowhere. With the reveal of Darth Vader as Luke's father, a few subtle hints were passed along throughout The Empire Strikes Back, and even A New Hope if you really read enough into the dialogue from Obi-Wan. But with Leia being the sister, that was not given the slightest hint. I also love the climax to this movie. To me, Return of the Jedi deserves an award for having one of the best climaxes ever. The scene where Darth Vader's helmet comes off and him and Luke talk, the emotion of their lightsaber battle, Luke burning his father after his death, and the great shot of Darth Vader in his full human form as Anakin Skywalker standing beside Yoda and Obi-Wan is just iconic stuff, and it still kind of chokes me up to this day. Then there's the action, which besides our wonderful Ewok scene, is great. The lightsaber battle between Darth Vader and Luke is the best in the movie. It's actually not as much of a fight as it was in The Empire Strikes Back, but just the emotion of it is very powerful. This is actually the one movie from the original trilogy where I felt that the acting wasn't great. It goes back and forth. Everything just seems a lot more overdone this time around. Mark Hamill's performance towards the end is very good, and is good overall in the film. Carrie Fisher goes back and forth, but I don't know whether that's her fault or the fact that for a good portion of the movie, she's working with giant teddy bears. Then there's Harrison Ford. For some strange reason, I didn't like his performance this time around. Most of the humor he has from Return of the Jedi seems more forced in than before. Ian McDiarmid was the biggest new actor added to the cast playing the Emperor, and he is unbelievably over the top, but he's actually really good over the top. So overall, with Return of the Jedi, it is the weakest of the three with a good amount of flaws, but it's still a really good movie with a really great climax. But before I end this review, let me just bring up an interesting little change that George Lucas made with the special edition version of this movie. And this was a change that pissed every Star Wars fan off. And it was only a 10-second change, too. And that was the replacement at the end of the movie. In the end of the movie, Luke sees the images of Anakin, Yoda, and Obi-Wan, and in the original version of the film, Anakin is played by Sebastian Shaw, but in the special edition version, he's replaced by Hayden Christensen, who plays Anakin in the prequel series. And from my point of view, it doesn't make any sense, and George Lucas's explanation isn't a good enough reason on why he changed that 10 seconds worth of film, and it remains to this day the most pointless change he has ever made. Well, that's the original trilogy of Star Wars. Tune in next week as we take a look at the one and only Star Wars prequel series. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.